Welcome to today's episode of the Dive Into Reiki podcast with a person I appreciate so much, and I got to meet in person as well, René Vögtli. I don't know if you want to say hi, René, first, and then I'll say your bio.
I'm happy to say hi. Hi, everyone.
Perfect. So, for those of you who are familiar with the podcast, we did a previous interviews around 2.5, 3 years ago, and you're going to have all of René's origin story. I'll link it to the notes. But for those of you who don't know René, he's a Reiki master, author, facilitator, and mediator. He's been the founder and member of numerous Reiki organizations and is the source of Reiki-Conciliation, committed to reconciliation within the Reiki community. In 2017, René released the acclaimed interview documentary Reconciliation Along the Path of Mastery, featuring Phyllis Lei Furumoto. Until 2023, he hosted the talk show RTalk, which I was very honored to participate in. And his RTalk agreed to disagree. The current project that René you're still like, you finished it, but it's still very much alive. It's very recent. Is called Reconciliation, Provoke and Evolve, Reiki History Through One's Man's Journey. And it's basically an interview documentary with Frank Arjava Petter. And for those of you who are not familiar with Arjava Petter, he's one probably of the most known and impactful Reiki masters in the world. And he lived in Japan. And as we'll discuss, he was the one who really found that memorial stone from Usui and really started bringing new information from what was the original Japanese practice, or what we can deduct was that Japanese practice, right? So it's super important that you did that. So obviously grateful to Frank Arjava Petter for doing that. But thank you for also having this, recording this for history. I was thinking some of the key masters right now, we take for granted they'll be alive, but it's a generation that changed Reiki, that globalized Reiki, and they may not always be there for us. And there will be tons of questions we'll have, and you actually make sure we can have those answers. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And you just said a very important thing. And this is something which motivated me greatly. And that is, while those masters from the past are still amongst us, let's try and resolve old issues. And the whole idea is to liberate future generations, such as yourselves and your listeners, so they can create their own messes, but they don't need to clean up the leftovers and the remnants of past times.
Yeah, and for me, it's very impressive because Reiki practice is about unity, but there is always a lot of, discussions, which is very common in philosophy and religion, is gone through history. So it's nothing new. But in the practice of oneness, it's always surprising. And I wanted to go a little bit backwards. Because you've been in the birth and the development of Reiki society across the world, like, right? I started in the almost 2010. You've been doing this and teaching since the 90s. What made you decide, like, we need to reconciliate? Like, how did you step out of, like, I'm right, you're wrong, you this or that, and actually decide, hey, this is a practice, let's bring conciliation?
Good question, important question. I need to go back a little bit to maybe the time after Havaya died in 1980 and the aftermath of that, and briefly try and describe what happened. And first of all, I'd like to emphasize that the people who followed Havaya Takata, the 22 masters who were spreading Reiki all over the world, that we should think of them with the assumption that they did their very best they could at the time. And the development was so rapid. If you think of where we are today, this is what, 64 years later,
Yeah.
and Reiki is mainstream, so to speak. And that's really astonishing, because we have to remember that people who practice Reiki get initiated by an individual. You can't mass distribute it, so
Yeah.
the growth is limited to some extent. But at the time when Havaya Takata died, her most favorite pupil Barbara Weber-Ray, Dr. Barbara Weber-Ray, the radiance technique, and Havaya Takata had some sort of falling out. One doesn't know what happened. But she was assumed, because she was the favorite pupil, she was assumed to be somewhat of a successor of Havaya Takata. But then there was this falling out. Enter Phyllis Furumoto, the granddaughter of Havaya Takata. And after the demise of Havaya Takata, basically there were two camps emerging. One gravitating around Barbara Weber-Ray, which some of us say they had a more, if you want, scientific or academic, not without spirituality, but they were thinking we need to standardize Reiki. The 21st century is coming. We need to answer questions to politicians, to medicine, and so on. So they took a more academic, let's call it, viewpoint. And the other camp, gravitating around Phyllis Furumoto, they had a more liberal, my expression, liberal point of view. I took them having an attitude of saying, how can we put a label on something so Mercurian like Reiki? It's like trying to label unconditional love. And isn't the continuous effort of controlling and understanding everything to every detail causes of so much discomfort, illness, and wars? So no, let's not be that stringent. So that was like a little bit the spirit of the two camps. And of course, they soon enough, they were at loggerheads with each other, one party thinking theirs is better than the others. And in the tension field, because Reiki started to separate, and please, everyone remember, at that time, only Western Reiki existed.
Yeah.
That which we today describe as Eastern or traditional Reiki was not known. Yes, there was some enigmatic rumors about the Gakkai in Japan existing, but nobody really knew. So at that time, those two camps emerged, and a third development, they called themselves often independent Reiki masters. They didn't belong to the Radiance Technique nor to the Reiki Alliance. And many of them said, well, that can't be it, that there's so much polarity, and it's somewhat in contradiction, people having these fights. And there was a lot of elbowing going on. Again, we're all human beings, right? So let's not forget that.
It's human.
And within that tension field, or within that energy field, in the late 80s, there was one of the Takata masters was actually in Australia, Beth Gray, and one of her students, Dr. John Feldheim. So Beth Gray related to Takata, and another Reiki master, Esther Feldheim, they married then, they got to know each other. She emerged more trained from Reiki Alliance and Phyllis Furumoto, correct? But she also was involved with the Radiance Technique. That couple met, and they founded what is today still existing, an organization called the Reiki Network. It's an international organization for Reiki masters. And they formed that, and they actually wrote a book, which coincidentally is on my book, one of the early Reiki books with the interesting subtitle, Science, Metaphysics, and Philosophy. So very early, because of John's interest in particularly metaphysics and his broad knowledge of Chinese, he was a TCM practitioner. The two of them got together, and they said, like many others, it can't be that there is fighting. So they started to try and find a symbiosis between, if you want, the teachings of both of these camps. And they founded the Reiki network. And one of the pillar values of the Reiki network from the beginning was to be apolitical. And even in this book, they're referring, for example, to the idea of Grand Mastery, the title of Grand Master. They defined it, and I think it's a good definition, that what's today probably a Daishihan, meaning a Reiki teacher who can teach other teachers. And they defined Grand Mastery as that.
Yeah.
And they said, so therefore, anyone who basically is a Daishihan in using this term, could call himself, in our language, a Grand Master. But they said already then, let's not do that, because that title is claimed by Phyllis Furumoto, and many of the people around her gave her that title. And although we did not subscribe, and my teachers did not ascribe to the concept of Grand Mastery and an exclusive succession, which also then Phyllis, of course, had the role of spiritual lineage holder. But they already then in the 80s said, let's not use that terminology because we want to stay out of all this politicking and elbowing.
Yeah.
So this is where I came from, with that spirit. So that's one part of your answer. And then the other part was my own biography. I reflecting, I'm now 73, we joked about the age before we started recording. And if I look back at my life, it appears that in my biography, the dynamics of reconciliation started at conception. I was conceived, and my biological father, disappeared. So it was a continuous topic in my own biography. Later, of course, in my professional life, when I was the managing director of an American corporation in Korea, I headed up their office there, a commodity trading company, and there was a dispute between the government of Korea and the American government over taxes, and I was the mediator in between. Reconciliation, and I was still far away from Reiki. So this is part of my DNA almost, it appears. Then appeared, and you brought it up in your introduction, you're astounded sometimes that people were at loggerheads and were fighting. But then appeared one Frank Arjava Petter on the scene. And he was one of those Reiki teachers with an amazingly interesting biography. Let's realize that he was the first who taught Reiki teachers in Japan outside the Gakkai, which was still in hiding, which still nobody knew much about it. So in a way, he brought Reiki back to Japan. And he had a checkered Western lineage, and there's a lot of, in my interview, I'm exploring all of that. It's an amazing
His
story.
training wasn't even that it was Western, but it was already kind of messy. It wasn't like the most rigorous training too at that time, right? It was a little.
It was one huge mess. I mean, so much so that at one point he had already been teaching Japanese people to the Reiki master level when he realized that his own lineage was fake, and he needed to make a correction. And in an overnight, he went to Europe to get himself reinitiated, incidentally, in the Reiki Alliance line of people, to go back to his students in Japan and to say to them, listen, guys, something went wrong, but I have a remedy. I invite you all to come back. I reinitiate you to make a correction, which of course raised the question in me instantly, did they all come back? And those who did not come back, what did they do? That's an entirely different kind of words, which I think would explode our podcast, or we'll make a separate one
Yeah.
about that
But
issue.
it also teaches, I love this. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's this story about this monk who hears from another monk who's very enlightened, and he travels through Japan and he finds this guy who looks like it's a peasant, and he's chanting, imagine instead of Aoi, he's chanting A. And then the guy tells him, like, hey, it's not A. From now on, please chant Aoi. And then the monk is a peasant, very say, okay, okay. And then the famous monk goes, the rich monk goes in his boat, like very happy to have trained the peasant monk. And then he hears plutch, 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 plutch. So was it A or A? Like, so it reminds me, like, yes, perhaps his training wasn't great, but the intent and the loving, Arjava is a very loving person, perhaps did wonders. And I don't want to promote people doing wrong rituals, but his intent was pure. So maybe those people who didn't come back are still enjoying some of the intent. Hopefully.
Well, maybe that's a point of view to take from today's perspective,
Yeah.
and that is one other podcast to talk about.
I know. Sorry, I'm the one. I promised to keep on track, and I'm the one going everywhere.
That's perfectly all right. But back in and we're talking now the early 90s or mid 90s when all this happened. And at that time, I think it was a very responsible thing of Arjava to do what he did. And of course, parallel to all of that, he did all his research together with his then Japanese wife to find out who was this Mikao Usui, and he met the president of the Gakkai without realizing that that woman was the president of the Gakkai, and she gave him information. It's a huge and very fascinating story, which of course, and I'm now getting back to my red line of my narrative, which of course led him to release a book in 1996 called Reiki Fire. And that was an earthquake. Because the Reiki community, the global Reiki community, was dominated by Western Reiki, being all descendants from Hawaii Takata, as Arjava was, right?
Yeah.
Still is at the release of his book. And in this book, Reiki Fire, for the first time, the discovery of the memorial stone, of course, was sensation. Triggered a lot of controversy. For one, it triggered controversy because it questioned some of the narrative which Hawaii Takata was supposed to have told. I was a little careful in my wording here, because remember, she is dead by now, and it is her successors who repeated the story, and it is proclaimed to be an oral story. And you know how it is. People say, I caught the fish yesterday. Day before yesterday, I caught a fish. Last week, I caught a fish. So
it's bigger and bigger, and then it's like almost like a huge fish versus a tiny sardine. Yeah.
And it has very little to do with the original specimen we found. So in that field, and we are talking now late 90s, I was already a fully professional Reiki teacher. My wife and I have, since 1993, we have been Reiki teachers and Reiki teachers only, nothing else. And my world was shattered too. And I remember I had in the Reiki network, there was a newsletter article I had written, and I referred to some information about the memorial stone, I guess it was. And a colleague of mine said, you must quote the source. And I said, no way am I going to quote Arjava Petter's name and his book. I'm not going to make public relation and promotion for him. That's how polarized it was at that time.
Oh my God. Sorry, I think it's very funny that 30 years after you're doing his documentary, right? So but because having you here, right? So in my head, I know Hawaya Takata, I know her story. So if we discover, but she always mentioned she had Hayashi, who had a teacher who was Mikao Sui, but so when we find the memorial, why were people surprised? Even, for example, we had recently a person saying that Mikao Sui wasn't Mikao Sui, was this kind of Christian monk, right? I was very open because for me, Reiki practice works, and I kept it open until now we realize probably those sources are wrong because we find further evidence that Mikao Sui did exist. But there was a moment where, like, in my practice, it's like, well, whoever he was, he may have been an alien. My practice works. So, what happened in the 90s where people were so shocked by this discovery? Because since I have you who actually went through that, I'm excited to hear.
Well, there's a danger here, Natalie, that we're talking about the historic
Yeah,
details. And I agree with you. We shouldn't get sidetracked with the details and let it actually to the scholars to work it out.
yeah,
And quite frankly, a lot of my personal opinion, a lot of the work the scholars are doing today has zero impact on my practice today,
I
on my
agree. Yeah,
Reiki practice. But it's important work they do. I'm
yeah, 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 yeah,
not
yeah.
saying
It gives
that
you
at all.
context.
But to answer your question, I can give you an example. The narrative which came down in the Western Reiki lore was that Usui was a Christian.
Oh, I see.
And also that he was a doctor. Now, all of a sudden, you have indications that no, he wasn't a Christian. And further research showed no, he wasn't a doctor in the sense of a medical doctor. So, because of the existing tension field, which was human, none of that had to do with real historic dispute. It was my Reiki is better than your Reiki. We're all battling for, and how do you teach Reiki? What do you tell your students? I don't know much to tell my students, so I decided to introduce archangels into my teachings because I need to fill the gap between my initiations. Right? Oh, really? So it was one chaotic, and it was that tension field, which was really, and then of course people used those discoveries divulged by Arjava to the horror. You know, there were people who said, how can he? It's a sacrilege to take a picture of the tombstone and publish that in a book. It's against the Japanese culture. And
Oh, God.
maybe that was so. And of course, the balance, as is always in historic research, is I saw just last week the Nuremberg, the movie. I don't know
Oh, I
whether
saw
you've
it
seen.
2 weeks ago too. I had never realized there was no international court before then, so it was quite enlightening, the movie.
This is a very important relevant factor. Is and the tribunal was a precedent of very historic significance. Um, but the reason why I'm mentioning the movie is there was a question in the movie. It was being discussed. Should we show the atrocities which were done, the original footage, which were appalling? I had to close my eyes. I couldn't watch all of that. Um, or is it counterproductive? So to show the tombstone in a book is also a balance of, well, potentially it might um, we are not even sure, but it might be in violation with certain traditional views in the Japanese culture, maybe. But the historic importance to show it is so heavy that, of course, it's justified to publish it. So, um, that was the earthquake and the disputes, and the other one was, was he a Christian? Was he not a Christian? Hawaii Takata said he was a Christian. I'm not sure she ever did. She certainly has presented Mikao Sui's and Hayashi's story to an American audience so that it would be understandable to them. So how close she brought Usui to Christianity, I don't know, and whether she made ever a claim that he was a Christian. My wife's uncle, who was a long-term missionary in Japan after the German Catholic missionary, he said that he baptized many Japanese people to Christianity after the Second World War. But of course, they maintained their original Buddhist or whatever beliefs. To them, it was not a contradiction. And so it was disputes like that. Was he a doctor? Was he not a doctor? Hawaii Takata said, translated the word sensei, which today we all understand to be an honorary way of addressing a teacher. Yeah. Another word might be guru from another culture, an honorary way to address a teacher. And of course, that then created the debate. Oh, she was misrepresenting Usui to the point that some people said Hawaii Takata was lying. So this was sort of the tension field which was in the air there. Yeah.
I appreciate you saying all of this, because I think like you were there, you experienced, and for us, like, it's really hard to understand now. And even though these things still happen, but I really appreciate you bringing that, because I think also sometimes we're so harsh, and that is still in my generation of Reiki teacher, we're so harsh towards Takata. We forget she went through World War II, where people were like encamped, and that you could not be openly Buddhist, and you had, like, it was a life and death or imprisonment. Like, what I think sometimes we lose the historical context, and it's so easy to judge people, right? Like,
exactly.
It's and the compassion, be compassionate is also, that's why I like history in a way. We learn.
And to remember our own imperfection. Please. I have been teaching Reiki for so many years. I've made mistakes. I've given misrepresentations. I've slipped out. No doubt about it. We're human beings. So that's a very important point you made there. So that was the tension field. And then the book came out. And then there was also a zeitgeist change. And that started 2005, 2010. To me, 2009, 10 was a significant change. And I'm saying that because that was the time when, for the first time, you saw in different places inclusive organizations, no longer organizations which were dominated by one school of thought, but by, and I'm thinking, and I was a co-founder of the Professional Association in Germany, Pro Reiki, and this organization managed to bring people under one roof from different walks of Reiki life, right? Which was very, very, very difficult to do. It's amazing today, but it was very difficult to find a common ground where we were not falling into the trap, mine is better or mine is more right than yours. So we had to agree on certain things, such as, for example, that people are getting initiated to Reiki, right? That the initiation, the attunement activates the Reiki or activates the Reiki in the hands. So we needed to find common ground in Germany, that organization, and not only, there were other places. It was all of a sudden it was there. I'm thinking of Reiki Home as an example. It started to liberate itself from the very Reiki Alliance dominated real or perceived. That's another topic yet again. But it started to liberate itself, emancipate itself.
Yeah.
And so that was a big change. And I became also somewhat a more mature person. I wasn't triggered by writing an article and saying, yes, the source is Nathalie Jaspar, and I'm not afraid of somebody going and contacting her. That fear I still had as a younger Reiki master. I needed to mature into my own role also, like many of us. And then in 2009, there was a Reiki convention in Germany, and it was one of those open, inclusive, the first one, maybe in Europe, but certainly in Germany, and not dominated by one particular school of thought. And I was invited as a representative for a podium talk on behalf of the Reiki Network, the international organization I mentioned. And I remember I arrived there, and this was the first time I exposed myself. Amazing. I felt I exposed myself to other Reiki thinkings. And I remember I was at the gate, Nathalie, and I looked inside. There was a big open space there, beautiful. And of course, the first person who walked through was carrying a drum under his arm, and he had a rainbow batik t-shirt, long hair, and he embodied all this esoteric Reiki, which I didn't want.
I'm like you. I think it's our Germanic heritage. Yeah, there is something in me. Yeah, I have that same reaction. But they're lovely. But we're not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I almost turned around, and then I thought, René, how judgmental can you be? You're teaching to your Reiki students. Eat your own bloody medicine, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
So, of course, I found exactly that. Highly intelligent, interesting, fascinating personalities. And on the second day, in the afternoon, I went, it was an open space. There was a little corner with a coffee machine. And the lady who made coffee had gone to the toilet. I don't know, she wasn't there. And I went to make myself a coffee. And behind me at the bar, I heard somebody leaning his elbows, and I turned around, and it was Arjava Petter. And to be honest, I was a little inhibited. I mean, this is a world-famous author.
Yes.
And he had revolutionized the Reiki community. And he was an invited guest speaker there. So, of course, I had just made a coffee. I turned around and said, can I offer you a coffee? And, of course, Arjava said, yeah. And we got to talk. We didn't speak about Reiki. We found that we both loved BMW motorbikes. We both have an affinity for Greece. He now lived in Greece by now. And that's how I got to know Arjava Petter. At that meeting, the first seeds were spread for the foundation of the German association, Pro Reiki. A few years later, I think we're talking 2014, they had an annual conference, and at that annual conference, they had invited Phyllis Furumoto as a honorary member. They offered her an honorary membership. And unfortunately, I wasn't at that meeting, but a student of mine from Vienna, Dr. Bolius, David, he was there, and she gave a speech, a thank you speech, and it blew everyone away. Even her own people who were close to her, they were blown away, because Phyllis was opening up to the international Reiki community and was showing an open mind like none of us had thought possible.
That's beautiful.
And of course, this says a lot about us and our imagination, what we think possible and not. It says nothing about Phyllis.
Well, it says about also what happens when you advance in your practice. I think another thing is we forget both Hawaii Takata, the 22 masters, Phyllis included, were very young masters when they lost their mentors. And you can see the Phyllis who's scared about the discoveries. She's a younger master. As she advances in her own journey, she becomes more open-minded and kind, right? So
Well,
it's a beautiful
actually,
thing.
Nathalie, if you're looking at the documentary it then made, which was actually it started at that with that speech. That was like the starting point exactly. That's where it all started. Her standing up and say, "I've got a much more inclusive heart and mind than I knew 10 years ago, maybe, and that any of us thought possible."
But isn't that
And
beautiful? Because it tells we in 10 years we'll have a bigger heart every time if we practice. I just find that beautiful.
that's so true. In fact, maybe this is a moment where you want to show one of the video clips.
And what happens in activating and restraining forces is that there's a reconciling force. And always the reconciling force is something that's greater than these two positions, right? Like there's this physics theory that I try to remember how to say, which is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's also true about this activating, restraining thing, is that the reconciling force, which we might call Reiki, brings something to creation, and there's something new that evolves because of this. So in our human endeavor, we always will have somebody saying yay and somebody saying nay, and there will be a reconciling force, and then something new will be created.
And she is talking there about something new coming from those two forces. And in fact, she said the reconciling force is springing forth from that. So that then was in 2017, where I made the amazing experience to find a woman who didn't know me from Adam and who I interviewed her for 2 days in Berlin, 3 days in Berlin. Then for 1 year, I spoke to about 100 people, William Rand, Walter Lübeck, all of them I could reach, Paul Mitchell, many of them, Rick Bochner, and many more. And basically I all said to them, look, soon I will do the second part of my interview. What is the burning question you would like me to ask Phyllis in context with reconciliation? So I collected all that. I went then to Arizona to do the second part of my interview. And that was the part, of course, during which we reflected all these years, which you and I discussed from her point of view, and I offered another point of view. I took Frank Arjava Petter's and other people's view into it. And she took responsibility for the transgressions she made during those times, those chaotic times. She took responsibility for transgressions made in her name. She asked for forgiving. And that was sensational. I mean, this woman's heart was just unbelievable. And I'm saying that because we might want to show a video clip where this is actually touched upon in a moment or two. And the reason why I'm saying that was after we finished all that, all the interview was done. I was about to leave Arizona, and the next day she said, why don't I invite you for a walk in the desert? And we went to a desert. She showed me the Green Valley, And we sat on a bench outdoors, musing, and she turns around to me and she says, tell me, how is your teaching different to what I teach? After all the filming, after she had given me everything. So she wasn't, most of us would try and check somebody out before we get into a contract of some sort.
Absolutely.
No, she listened to her gut feeling, to her heart. Yet she tested me. Yes, she asked probing questions. Oh, yes. And it wasn't always easy with her, not at all. But she gave, and it was at the very end when she's, and at the end she said to me, because I explained to her how my Usui Shiki Ryo, my Western Reiki teaching, does not hold the concept of Grand Mastery or spiritual lineage holder. So I am not respecting that role. And some other technical details and so on. And she says, I like your thinking. Why don't you join the core succession group?
Oh, we're
And she had a group of 20 odd globally spread people who met every month for 2 years until she died to discuss the question of her succession. And I was the odd one out. I was not initiated by her. I was not one of her followers, so to speak, at all. And I'm saying that to show the greatness of that woman's mind.
I love that you're showing that. And for those who are not familiar, like Arjava and his book, there were like injunctions, there were like a lot of things that were done, uh, like physical, not just talking of gossip, like legal and all of that that were done. And he really struggled with that book. So yeah, the apologies is beyond just, not respecting the book. There were also like a lot of challenges in the publication part of it.
His family was threatened. He went through hell for long time.
I didn't know, and that's why like I gonna that for me that our Java project is so beautiful. I didn't know people will go into other people's houses and steal the book and destroy it. Like we're talking about stuff like I'm like I can't believe, right? But it's also a lesson because I think we see this as past, but I see now the times and we're still judging each other, right? Like I don't like that lineage. Like I think our Java story is also like is a constant reminder of how we have to behave. We have to be careful because we may not like the dolphins from Venus Reiki lineage, but we have to be respectful because we think we're right and we're going to go and destroy the dolphin lineage and we're doing right, we're doing wrong. So it's a good reminder.
This is so important what you just said, Natalie. We need to keep talking to each other, even if we are of different opinion.
Yeah.
And in fact, do show that other clip,
which one?
which is a little longer.
For all these things, I want to ask your forgiveness because it wasn't my intention. It's not the way I hold you. And everyone has been a great teacher for me. And without you, I wouldn't be who I am today.
We can leave that behind now. Yeah, nice. There comes a point where it's just not relevant anymore. No, it's okay. We learned the lessons and we're okay. Huh? Let it go now. Nice. In the end, it all comes down to that. Yeah. So if two people have a conflict with one another, what should they do? Talk. Get together, talk. And don't wait until it's really poisonous and fermented nicely, and stinky and all that. Don't carry it, because then becomes, as we can see in all of this, it becomes such a mess. Huh? So the best is just to talk.
Well, Nathalie, that's precisely what you said before the clip.
Yeah.
And actually, while it was playing, I thought, and this is why it's so important that you do the broadcast and the podcast you do.
Yeah, it's for me, it's helped me grow as a person because I was a very judgy person. I started on Western, and we also have to be careful when we call Western because it wasn't like the Alliance. It was a very magical Reiki, very New Age Reiki, which wasn't a right fit for me. It didn't make it bad, but at the time when I found like a more traditional, a little bit more simplistic, I'm like, oh, this is better. Yeah, it's better for me, but it's not better. And it took me many years to like soften. I think with, it's dialogue and softening. And through talking to people, it's like, oh, I can see like it's just different sides of the same diamond. We just see different sides of it, right? And the other thing is like now when someone says something that I go like, what? Instead of I still react sometimes, but in general, it's like, okay, how do that person see this? And I actually learn because they have such a different point of view that to try to understand them, I have to question myself and I have to grow as a person and expand my understanding of Reiki to make sense, of what that person is perhaps perceiving. And it's quite interesting.
I so agree with you. And I think that's what you just said is true for beyond Reiki, for the world at large. Of course, the Reiki and the Reiki community gives us an opportunity, like in the playground, to learn something. But really, it was so terrible during Corona when family members said, I'm not talking to that person anymore because he is or he is not vaccinating. Or today, as we have the world situation today, where it's so polarized, and when people start to say, and that's also true in our community still today, there are still proponents, new proponents, who are saying, well, that person transgressed and I'm not going to talk to him anymore. And he has such and such an opinion. And therefore, I'm not going to talk to him anymore. That's the end of basically what we are teaching with Reiki and what we're living with Reiki.
Yeah. And I think there is the danger to say, because they have bad vibes. I'm a Reiki practitioner, I have good vibes, so I won't participate in bad vibes, right? So I think we have this tendency still and I say we, at least I have, and I have to really fight about it. And today I was thinking before this interview about the beauty of the word reconciliation. I don't think I ever, like, it's a word like reconciliation. And today I was like, the beauty of reconciliation is not like you don't bypass, you don't ignore, past is past. You need to really work at it, understand and accept the other, and then bring together. It's not like, oh, okay, we'll ignore half and we're all peaceful because we ignore what the other person is. It's accepting and is working to expand the understanding and the compassion. And I really was like, oh, wow. I had never, like, you've been working on reconciliation, but I think it's such a beautiful word versus just like, let's all have good vibes and be happy together, right? So I may be understanding wrong, but it's beautiful.
You're so right. And because we basically would like to be happy with each other, we tend to sometimes jump to that conclusion too quickly. And actually, we then make pretend as though we had forgiven and had reconciled. And of course, another thing about the reconciliation process is that people, or it's worthwhile to remember what the Dalai Lama said: forgiving is not forgetting. Forgiving doesn't include approving of what the person has done wrong in the past, myself or somebody else. And finally, what you just said, and I'm glad you reflected on the word reconciliation, because to forgive a person, I can do on my own.
Yeah.
I don't need to include the other person. Reconciliation can only be done if both of them are involved.
Yeah.
That's the high art. This is precisely where we started at the beginning, when those culprits, when those protagonists, let's call them, were still around or alive. We had an opportunity to do that and speak with each other while we had them there. And this allowed what you've just shown in the video clip, Phyllis's apology, Arjava's part by accepting it. And, if you're looking at the whole interview, you will find many spots where Arjava is taking responsibility for the things he has contributed to the situations in his life which created tension and transgressions.
I really like another thing that probably is part of reconciliation is accountability, right? And as I listen, because I really listened to the interview and I really love it. It's like, hey, my reaction, I was trying to learn how to put boundaries. I didn't know, and I was reactive. But I think that's seeing clearly without so much judgment and more compassion to ourselves. Like, I think that compassion to ourselves is like, we were talking, I was a new master. They attacked me. I wasn't expecting it. And I reacted a little strong. And that is okay. Like, we're humans. And the fact that we're Reiki practitioner doesn't mean we have to act perfectly all the time. What we have to be is accountable and try to be compassionate, and if we can make amends if possible and needed, that's it. Like, that's the only thing we need to do. We don't need to be perfect all the time. Ideally we would be, but imagine the stress of trying to live perfectly all the time. Like, then you will be so stressed out, you will make mistakes all the time. I don't know. I'm not perfect. I wish I were sometimes, but how do we grow then? There is no space to grow. There is no space to live if we're perfect. Why are we even doing here if we're perfect?
Yeah, that's a philosophical reflection, which
Yeah.
would deserve a podcast on its own.
I will. Yeah, it's funny. So when I was 16, I didn't want to go to university. I wanted to go to Paris and be a philosopher. I ended up going to universities and God work, but now I realize my podcast is my coffee shop, which you are invited to philosophize. So I ended up doing my childhood dream. And I'm grateful when people like you accept the virtual coffee.
And I think this is a very important part that we also speak about other things of life. I know you're very art affine. You like the arts. You have a lot of interest. You go to the museums and so on. So to talk about something entirely different within the Reiki community is extremely wholesome, because people have seen you or me and have seen us through their filters. And you represent a type of Reiki, and I represent a type of Reiki. And very quickly, like you said earlier, we tend to get into a judgmental kind of level. So to experience you, for example, from an entirely different angle, talking about the art, and I know you're very passionate about fashion and museums, then people who have a dislike towards you can say, oh, that's an interesting woman. Oh, that's an interesting thing. That's precisely why in my podcast, which I had, where you were a guest and you mentioned, we spoke about everything else but Reiki, and I also didn't speak about reconciliation. That was too close to home. Let's talk about other things, and people will get to know us, and that in itself is a contribution of mutual empathy and understanding.
No, that is beautiful. And again, in those documentaries you're doing, what I also love was Arjava the human. It wasn't just tell me for an hour what you did. It's really exploring his past. And I think something that also you did a podcast for many years, like it's beautiful for people to go back to it. I remember talking about judgmental at the beginning. I tried to be a full-time Reiki master. It's not for me. And then I tried to hide I work full-time. I'm not very open about it. And I did Reiki for people who actually will have to go to work every day. And I have to say, I actually love my work. I love doing advertising. I love the people. I work in a very beautiful place and I grow there every day because egos in advertising are huge, right? So as you advance also, and as you said, we're more than just a Reiki practitioner. If we're just Reiki, we're one-dimensional. But also we're keeping our practice to something small versus our whole lives, right? So bringing it to who we are as people, yes, we'll have more areas to connect, but it's also more real. Like, this is who I am, and there is nothing wrong in liking my job just because I practice Reiki and then my Reiki practice is lesser than yours. Like, we need to start rethinking what Reiki is. It's just a spiritual practice.
Yeah, I'm so with you. And you know, to have the privilege like you have, you called it a coffee shop, to have the privilege of sitting with Phyllis for so many hours, for days, literally, on one topic with one camera running all the time, and then to do the same thing with Arjava. And have the honor and privilege of them utterly opening up. There wasn't once a question they refused to answer.
How beautiful.
I'm not saying that it was easy for them. I'm not saying that. But they were absolutely prepared to open up completely. Both of them, they just gave all the time.
Wow.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's a great. And, you know, maybe to explain the concept of my archive, right? When I filmed Phyllis, and I had about 12 to 14 hours of raw material, I had to edit it to a 50-minute main feature movie. Now, I knew that her fans would applaud some things and some things they would dislike. And they would wonder whether it is because of the way I edited. I knew this was coming. Equally, that those who were opposed to Phyllis, that they would say, oh, that sounds too good to be true. I don't believe she said that. I think it's René's editing version. Because I knew this was coming from that polarized past we had together, I decided, well, let me make everything available. That's how I took the 14 hours and I made 66 videos. And you know, I didn't do that by purpose. It was exactly 66 videos.
Wow.
Also with Arjava later. Why it was exactly 66, I don't know. And I made that available in the archive. That is a lot of work. I can't and don't want to make that available for free. So that is at the cost. But the cost is very low, and it helps me also recuperate some of the expenses, which I'm still trying to cover from all the work I've done just with these two people. And of course, Reiki-Conciliation is much more than just the visual video work. I'm doing a lot of other stuff as well.
And we're going to show the bundle video. I just want to mention that you're saying Arjava gives, and Phyllis gave, but you are giving so much because you are giving those features for free on YouTube, and they're quite interesting, even the 50 minutes, but also you're giving the world a chance to get to know people that most of us won't get to know. I was lucky enough to meet Arjava in person, but again, I didn't have hours with him. So a lot of people can also understand the Reiki history, but also those interviews are more than just history. You really understand who they were and also the practice per se. And they're beautiful. So you're also giving. And you're also even giving the subscriber of this podcast, everybody who's listening, a discount code, which I will put in the notes, which is Diver26, and you get 26%. It's all with sixes with you. I'm a 357 lover. You're a 6 lover. So you're really very generous humans. Again, hours of beautiful free interviews for us to grow as people, to connect, to reconciliate. And I just want to say a big thank you because you also have been talking about all generosity of others. And I just want to highlight yours as well.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. It touches me that you said that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Shall we finish this with the bundle video?
Please.
Perfect. So thank you so much, René. We'll finish with the video. But you know, my heart, it's just so grateful for this. And let's see if now it works well. Have it here.
Thank you, Nathalie, very much.